Hello, everyone. It's not Wednesday, but I'll be honest, I forgot yesterday to do the recap. So I'm doing it today on Wednesday's Bible study. And yesterday, we studied Philippians 2 and verses 12 through 30. So in this, we have Paul kind of shift because last week, you'll remember that he was talking about Christ, specifically the spirit that was in Christ, right? That this idea of humility and stuff like that. And so he shifts from talking about Jesus to shifts talking about the people he's writing to. So we talked about what it means to serve and a little bit of what the Christian life looks like to Paul here. Um, so here he calls them to obey the teachings of Christ, obey Paul's teachings, especially because he isn't there, right? And one of these teachings that's very important for them to understand is to be humble, right? And to not argue with each other, not grumble, right? And the reason that they do this is twofold. One, they do it because it's what God commands them to do. So right there, that's something that you should be doing no matter what, right? We don't do things because we think we're going to get something out of it, right? We do things because we can help people and because Christ commands us to. So that's number one. Number two, we do it because we are evangelists, right? And if we do these things, if we follow Christ's commands, then we will be, as Paul states in verse 15, shine like the stars in the sky, right? So people will see you and be attracted to your message. And Jesus has a very similar message when he tells his people that they are the light of the world, right? So you have a very similar interplay there between Jesus and Paul's teachings here. And that is because actions speak louder than words. Words are important. Never forget that. But the point is that people need to actually see you're living by the tenets that you're being taught, right? Because that actually, changes their perspective of you. Obviously, we can think of any Christian out there who we've seen popularly on the news or something like that, where they don't act the way that they're supposed to and are attacked for it, usually rightly as hypocrites, right? And so this is important for us to remember. And so he says that this will prepare them well if he has to die. And of course, we as Christians know that Paul does go on and die and probably never makes it back to Philippi because he's killed in Rome. So when that's done, he shifts focus to kind of giving them an example of this. And he brings up two people that he is sending back with the letter, Timothy and Epaphroditus. So firstly, we have Timothy, and Timothy you probably all know from the Acts of the Apostles or the two epistles that Paul writes to Timothy probably after this point, where he sends, he talks about how close he and Timothy are, and he calls him in this, like a son to him, right? And so he sends Timothy back, and Timothy's going to kind of help lead the Philippians in light of Paul's absence. And he's also going to bring them the letter from Paul. Because you have to remember, in the ancient world, it took a while to get around a little bit, especially with letters. So this is just to make sure that the Philippians know they know Paul was sick or in pain in some way. And so they want to know that he's going to be okay. And so Timothy's coming back to bring this letter. And so Timothy is kind of an example of his humility. But then he brings up someone who's from the Philippians themselves, who's this guy called Epaphroditus. We don't know too much about Epaphroditus outside of what we get in this passage, but from this passage you can kind of glean some interesting things, right? So he sends Epaphroditus back because in the ancient world, we can assume that Epaphroditus was sent to help Paul, because in the ancient world, when you were in prison, basically the people who were looking after you didn't care about you all that much. And because they didn't care about you all that much, it was on people on the outside to make sure that you were being taken care of, like clothing and better food and stuff like that, right? Paul's writing utensils, right? Bringing him stuff like that. That's for people on the outside to bring to Paul. And so Epaphroditus probably served as a person the Philippians sent to help care for Paul. But while he's caring for him, he himself gets incredibly ill and almost dies, and Paul remembers, tells them that, right? And so he sends him back just because he wants to make sure that Epaphroditus can get back home. And so he sends him, but he uses Epaphroditus as a really good example of what he's looking for in the Christian life and what he thinks the Philippians should model themselves after. And he uses two words here in particular, which is, well, three, I guess. Brother, which is a familial term, right? And Christians should see themselves as a family. But two, I think, kind of more important ones, just for the focus of humility, is coworker and fellow soldier, right? So when you think about workers and when you think about soldiers, and you just think about what you imagine those things to be, the images that probably come to your mind are people who have to work hard for little pay, sometimes in incredibly dangerous circumstances, and who rely on others in order to do their job well, right? And so he's using those two things not just because they're nice sounding, right? He's trying here to make sure that people understand this is what the Christian life is like, right? We have to be like soldiers. We have to be like workers. This is appropriate, actually, for Veterans Day, I guess, in the sense that we have to remember that we have to sacrifice and go beyond ourselves for the purpose of spreading the gospel, right? And so Epaphroditus is a perfect example of that because he left Philippi, came to Paul, ministered for him and to him, and almost died, but survived through God's grace, and shows this humility and this willingness to put aside even his own life in order to serve the gospel, right? So that's what Paul is trying to get at here. And then he ends this by just saying, he risked his life for helping the things that you could not give me. And so he thanks the Philippians through that. And then the chapter ends. So this chapter is mainly just about, again, stressing this idea of humility through encouragement and using this idea of a soldier and a worker to try and help the Philippians understand what Paul is talking about. So that was our recap. Sorry it got out so late, but I will see you guys next Wednesday for our next Bible study. And I guess later today for our mailbag question. Peace out.